This is The Uprising, a podcast of LibertyNation.com, and welcome back, or welcome aboard if it's your first time around. We've got a lot of guns on the table this week to talk about, both within and without the movement. Some interesting fights going on. We have gun control, really multiple candidates for President of the United States leading with anti-gun announcements, both Kamala Harris and this Swalwell guy. They're proclaiming it like their number one issue is taking guns away from fellow Americans. So we're going to get into that. We're also going to get into Donald Trump at the NRA convention and what I think should have happened there, which was that he should have got a Bronx cheer instead of a standing ovation. And also internal political fights taking place at the NRA, perhaps existential fights regarding the future of that organization. There is a coup of brewing at the current national convention. Firstly, though, the big news, it looked touch and go at the beginning of the week, but it did happen. Joe Biden formally enters the race for President of the United States. And for a very special segment on the podcast, here's me with Tim Donner to talk about it. Tim Donner, Uprising Joe Biden for President correspondent, fresh from your trip to the Wilmington White House? No?
Yes, I love that. Wilmington. That's really good. I strained to find something with a D, like Delaware something, but you've come up with it. Wilmington White House. I'm going to run with that.
Well, Tim, I know that you wrote a piece for LibertyNation.com about Joe Biden and his entry into the presidential race. I haven't read it just yet, but I'm assuming that it's consistent with your other high-quality writings, and I recommend it to others, a sight unseen on that basis alone.
It's consistent with my other writing. If you want to use high quality, that's in the eye of the beholder.
I appreciate your writing, so I do call it high
quality.
Thank you.
I appreciate that.
But I appreciate your reportage on the Biden matter for this program even more. So I'll leave the floor to you, and please let us know what's going on with Joe Biden.
Well, he's in the race, as everybody figured. It seemed like an on-again, off-again thing he was going to announce, then he wasn't, and then he postponed it. It originally was going to be in Charlottesville.
Mm-hmm. Symbolic for Joe Biden's progressivism.
On Wednesday. But he eschewed going to Charlottesville, but it's obvious in watching, or in this case, hearing his announcement video why he had Charlottesville in mind. Because, Scott, when he announced today, it was a singular attack on President Trump as a white supremacist, a racist, someone who went.
So just to
that was the whole video.
So let me just
Let
me just announce to people, we're recording this. It is about 4:45 p.m. Eastern Daylight Savings Time on Thursday. And you were surprised when we first started that I hadn't seen this video. And I have purposely stayed away from Biden news just to hear it from you. So, yeah, I'll hear it for the first time.
All right, so he starts out with a lot of flag waving, quoting the Constitution, all the stuff that most presidential candidates do. And then he immediately goes into a diatribe about what happened at Charlottesville. This was the whole video, and here's pretty much all you have to hear.
Charlottesville is also home to a defining moment for this nation in the last few years. It was there on August of 2017 we saw Klansmen and white supremacists and neo-Nazis come out in the open. Their crazed faces, illuminated by torches, veins bulging and bearing the fangs of racism. And that's when we heard the words of the President of the United States that stunned the world and shocked the conscience of this nation. He said there were, quote, some very fine people on both sides.
Mm-hmm. That's what he said.
God.
Now, listen, Scott. That is such a gross distortion of what Trump said.
Every other week I play these two clips. I'm going to play them right now. Here is Trump, and this is what he said about the people in Charlottesville who were there because they thought it was not unreasonable, that it was okay to maybe leave up these statuaries
that had been there for over a century.
It doesn't matter that their rationale for wanting to leave them up wasn't racism, and Trump says so.
But that isn't what was reported. That isn't what will ever be reported. And okay,
well, let's just take a listen to that clip right now. Hold on here. Hold on 1 second.
These are all the remarks that you need to hear.
But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides. You had people in that group, excuse me, I saw the same pictures as you did. You had people in that group that were there to protest the taking down of, to them, a very, very important statue and the renaming of a park from Robert E. Lee to another name.
And if anybody wasn't sure exactly what he was talking about, Tim, in the same presser, he then clarifies, just in case there's any debate about whether he's talking about white supremacists. And here's what he says.
You're changing history, you're changing culture, and you had people, and I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, because they should be condemned totally. But you had many people in that group other than neo-Nazis and white nationalists, okay? And the press has treated them absolutely unfairly. Now, in the other group also, you had some fine people.
So we know for sure that Donald Trump has said one thing only, and it's I hate to have to keep saying it, but the DNC chair, I think it was 2 weeks ago, said it on either Meet the Press, is all Trump is saying is that you can be a good person and think those statues should be taken down, and you can be a good person and think they should stay up, and not have anything to do with being a racist or a white supremacist or anything like that.
I think that it's clear now that unlike the other presidential candidates, the other 20 that are in the race, that are at least giving lip service to the idea of running a campaign on something more than just despising Trump the most, that Joe Biden is apparently basing his whole campaign on not Trump. He's not Trump, and that will be enough for him because the whole video was consumed with Trump's hatred. The whole video was about Trump.
Not only that, Tim, but this is what Joe Biden's saying, if you support Donald Trump,
you are a racist.
You're half a step away if you're not an actual racist.
I don't even know if you're half a step away.
So
this is
a straight progressive attack, by the way. And he was going to be, I thought, from what I heard on the
moderate,
he was going to be the unprogressive candidate. He was going to be the adult in the room who didn't think we could rebuild every building in the universe inside of 12 years and stop.
Well, this is his play for the progressive vote, obviously, because you have to play for that in the far left crazed environment that the Democratic presidential candidates are running in with one radical idea after another. Like this week, we had Bernie Sanders, who thinks people in prison, including the Boston Marathon bomber, should be allowed to vote.
AOC's chief of staff, whose name I can't recall right now, he's very active on Twitter, and he tweeted also that the right to vote is mentioned several times in our Constitution. Right. It's a fundamental right, and the best reply I saw to him was, so's the right to keep and bear arms. Do you think the guy should be able to have a gun inside a prison?
Well, you give up all kind of rights.
Of course you do.
When you go to prison.
That's the point of prison, is to strip you of your rights, actually, which is one of the reasons why I think, Tim, we should be putting fewer people in prison rather than more people. But that's not what AOC and Bernie want. They want more laws and more people to go to prison.
But this is the climate that Biden now enters. And this is his play for saying he's just as progressive as the rest of them. In fact, he's more progressive because he's been progressive for 40 years, when in fact he's been a corporatist from beginning to end, to the very core of his being, as you have so rightly pointed out.
When he wasn't being a hardcore drug warrior, by the way.
A drug warrior, too. Absolutely. But this is
authoring, not just a drug warrior in terms of rah, let's do it, but authoring the crime bill that made so many inner city blacks have to spend time in prison that they wouldn't have otherwise.
This is a naked play for the black vote.
Whoa, which don't say naked around Uncle Joe, Tim.
That's true. Trouble there. Trouble on the horizon. That's one of, I concluded my article, Scott, by saying there's so many problems with Joe Biden that he could spend the entirety of his presidential campaign explaining them all away. You've got the problem with Ukraine and the fact that his son was given $166,000 a month for to serve as a vice president for a business he didn't know anything else. And then they suppressed the investigation by having...
Let's just slow that down just for a second, Tim, okay? Because I don't think that everybody knows about it.
Well, I'm
Joe
trying to explain
Biden's
it.
son, who had no experience at all in oil... He's like you and I. He watched J.R. Ewing when he was a kid, right? Like that's his. And we lost what's his name today, by the way, Cliff Barnes. Unfortunately, rest in peace.
Oh, is that right?
Yes, we did.
I'm sorry to hear that.
But
Ken
that's
Kercheval, I believe, was his name.
fantastic.
That's very
Look
good.
at you.
Yes.
He didn't know anything about the oil business. Had no previous experience in the oil business, and all of a sudden, people with massive interests that could be positively affected by a kind word from a vice president of the United States hired his kid for a huge salary to go live and work in Ukraine. It would be like could be like literally hiring me to go do that.
But that wasn't even the worst part of it. The worst part was that the company he worked for came under investigation for racketeering and money laundering, and the Obama administration, what they did was threaten to remove loan guarantees to Ukraine unless this chief prosecutor was fired. And then he was fired, and Biden's son, Hunter, kept his job. That's one thing, okay?
It's good to be friends with the king, right?
And on top of that, look at his failed presidential... It's embarrassing performance in two previous presidential campaigns. In 1988, he had to pull out because he plagiarized a speech from Neil Kinnock, a British politician, and he was called out on it. And then they revealed that he had cheated in law school. He plagiarized at Syracuse University Law School. He plagiarized something from a law review journal, and he barely escaped expulsion at that point. So you've got that problem. In 2008, he ran for president. He didn't even achieve 1% in the first contest, the Iowa caucuses, and he pulled out immediately. So what is it this time that he thinks is going to appeal to Democrat voters that he couldn't get them to understand the first two times he ran?
You know, he may have a point in terms of if you can just get ahead of this. He's got the great name recognition in terms of being the immediate past vice president of the United States.
Another excuse to use that term.
So that, there's the power of incumbency for the free press, and his power in that regard doesn't come from incumbency, but immediate past incumbency, and it is big in terms of, there's a guy who I'm actually going to produce a segment for later on in the uprising, later on before the show gets released, and I forget his name. He's a congressman from California, and I made a note to talk about his introduction into the race, but I don't even remember his name. I know Joe Biden's name, Tim, and so do most Americans because of that history.
And that's the only
that has
reason.
Some brand that has some power. So if he can stay ahead, hear my point. If he can actually get a nose ahead of these other folks because of that brand recognition, maybe anybody could win against Trump, meaning because Trump has been so demonized and denigrated by the legacy media for so long, right? I mean, it's a daily show.
That any not Trump can beat Trump.
Not any, but almost any. We know that Hillary is just a step too far, but maybe Biden is Hillary light enough that his corruption is only mild compared to hers.
All right, but name recognition, Hillary Clinton had about 95% name recognition going into the 2016 race. That actually hurt her. Biden's name recognition is high, but as soon as he gets in the race, they're going to start attacking him. And he has not shown the ability really to respond in an effective way.
He's a buffoon.
He is a buffoon.
I mean, that's fair to say.
He's a total buffoon. It's hard to believe that this guy is the front runner.
It's
in the
bonkers insane. When Obama picked him to be his... I think we had a conversation about it.
There was no reason for it.
What the hell are you doing? It doesn't make any sense.
It's like just picking some generic corporatist white guy to sort of balance the ticket.
That's
now, let's also talk a little bit before we end this overly long segment.
Tim, I am the producer of the Uprising podcast, and I'm here to tell you it is not overly long. We're hearing a lot of positive response of the interaction, by the way, on the Biden segment. You're getting a lot of praise out there.
Good.
Absolutely.
Well, glad to hear it. Well, let's talk about this one then, because I think people will like this. And this is Joe Biden's apology tour, which he has done leading up to this big day when he makes his announcement calling Trump a racist.
Has he apologized for parading naked in front of the Secret Service women who are...
not as of yet.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Did he apologize for pulling levers of power that the others of us couldn't pull to get his kid a plum spot in the Navy that he then showed up high on cocaine? Or is that something that wasn't included in this?
I think he's working on a response to that.
Just checking. All right.
But here's the apology tour.
Go ahead.
Okay, it's an unofficial apology tour, sort of like Obama's, except Obama was apologizing for the United States when he made his world apology tour. Biden's apologizing for himself. Now, the first part of that was when he had the temerity about, 6-8 weeks ago, had the temerity to call Vice President Mike Pence a decent guy. An LGBTQ, I got it right. LGBTQ, one LGBTQ activist tweeted out that it was a disgrace because Pence was anti-gay. Biden apologized on Twitter an hour later. Now, there's a profile in political courage for you, Scott. Yeah. He apologizes for calling a decent guy a decent guy. But wait, that's not all. Then he went back to the Anita Hill hearing and said, I wish there was something I could have done to assist Anita Hill. Not perhaps cognizant of the fact that he was the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. There's wishes that then. That's
a good line, by the way, for people who don't know that fact.
I wish I could have done something.
No, in other words, for some universe of people, it's like, well, he does wish he,
Yeah, he wishes. Yeah, that's
right.
That's good. But here was the most overt act of pandering I've seen in a long time. And this was after he talked about Anita Hill. He said it's all because of the white guy culture.
Right.
And he said in his most profound voice, that's got to change.
That's why we have to elect Joe Biden. And I believe our first doctor as First Lady, Jill Biden, elevate them to the White House, and that's when this tyranny of whiteness will end.
But I mean, he decries the white guy's culture, apparently thinking no one will notice that he's like the poster child for the corporatist white guy culture that he's attacking. And then, of course, there was the apology for the 6 people who publicly came forward to say the women who were victims of unwanted touching. And in that one, and we discussed this, he said
kisses by Uncle Joe.
He understands that social norms have changed. Translation, Scott. It was okay for me to paw these women then, but now in the Me Too movement culture, I understand. I won't do it anymore.
I won't pinch any butts.
But he didn't say it was wrong or that he regrets it. Only that social norms have changed. So there's Joe Biden's apology tour, Scott.
I wonder if they'll let him get away with it. And I think it's interesting to see how these various media properties, because they all have their horses in the race, right?
Exactly.
I'm going to play later on this MSNBC clip with the aforementioned congressional member who's running for president from California, and his performance on MSNBC, and he's clearly not their choice. So it's like when they're critical of a Democrat, especially if they're critical in a way that you might see from a right-wing publication, what are the criticisms that they're using, or if they attack them from the left, then we know.
Now, you're not planning to attack Eric Swalwell.
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah, Eric Swalwell.
But he wants to stop gun violence against kids in schools, Scott. How can you be against
just common sense, Tim?
Common sense. Well, let me tell you something, though. When it comes to Biden, the long knives are already out for him from the other 20 candidates.
Has there been one who stood out as an effective attacker?
Not enough time has passed yet from when he announced to this
By
recording.
By the way, in a campaign season where so many on that side of the aisle, and I think I'll close out with this, Tim, not that I'm not criticizing you for not bringing it up because you're above it, all right? I'm not, though, which is that if you want to make fun of a candidate's hair, go ahead, everybody, and do a Google image search on Joe Biden's hair.
Oh, the plugs.
And enjoy yourself a laugh.
I thought do you feel, Scott, that Biden's plugs were done effectively, or would you have
effectively for a human? If you're actually trying to replicate a doll's head, then yes, he's got.
Okay. Right.
And by the way, it's not appropriate. Meaning, like if Joe Biden had good policies, I wouldn't care what his hair looks like. I don't care. It's a laugh line a little bit, but the way it's focused on with Trump, with his physical visage, and their attacks on him. Do you remember the naked statue they put up, the like 3 of them in New York that made fun of his things?
Yes.
Again, these are the people who say body shaming is verboten, and you can't do it. Unless, of course, it's somebody who you disagree with politically.
Well, Scott, all rules are off when it comes to Trump. All rules are suspended because this is a unique situation requiring unique actions
Democracy
to take
in danger,
down.
Tim.
Yes.
Democracy dies in darkness.
It dies in darkness, Scott.
Joe Biden, for president reporter for the Uprising podcast. Tim Donner, thank you so much for joining us.
And I'm looking forward to many more of these sessions, Scott. They're a guilty pleasure.
Tim and I recorded that on Thursday. On Friday, when he was flying out to the NRA convention, Donald Trump again directly addressed the issue of his statement in Charlottesville that there were good people on both sides. Here is the very latest from Friday, April 26. In case you can't hear the question as it's shouted over the helicopter blades, it is this. Mr. President, do you still think there were very fine people on both sides in Charlottesville?
President, do you still think there were very fine people on both sides in Charlottesville?
Oh, I've answered that question, and if you look at what I said, you will see that that question was answered perfectly. And I was talking about people that went because they felt very strongly about the monument to Robert E. Lee, a great general, whether you like it or not. He was one of the great generals. I've spoken to many generals here, right at the White House, and many people thought of the generals, they think that he was maybe their favorite general. People were there protesting the taking down of the monument of Robert E. Lee. Everybody knows that.
So not only was the question answered, but it was answered perfectly. Oh boy, that guy is a laugh riot. But once again, will the left stop lying about his answer? It's not a mistake anymore, right? I mean, the facts are out there. If you say Trump was saluting racists and white supremacists and saying there are good people who are members of those two groups or ideologies, you're lying. And it's a pretty disgusting lie. At some point, that sort of lie can do a lasting damage to this country. And I hope that legacy media members, when these people appear on their programs, hold their feet to the fire. They shouldn't be able to pick at America's scabs for their own political benefit with impunity.